They say the ancients built with stone, but that is only half the truth. They built with silence, with rhythm, with number. And if you listen closely, beneath every pillar, every wall, every doorway, aligned to a forgotten star, you will hear it. A code, not written in language, but woven into proportion. A number that repeats, subtle, persistent, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of form. 144. Not a measurement, not a superstition, a signature. You will not find it carved in plain sight. It hides in the angles, in the spacing of stones, in the breath between walls, in the shadow cast at the solstice that lands exactly where it always has. Why? Why would this number echo in Egypt, in Angkor, in Teotihuacan, in places that never met but remembered the same thing? To the modern eye, 144 is just math, 12 times 12, a square of a dozen, a number in a table. But to the builders, it was something more. A vibration. A bridge between form and formlessness, between sky and earth, between human and divine. It wasn't chosen, it was heard. Because they didn't think like we do. They didn't separate number from music, form from frequency, stone from spirit. To them, the world was tuned, and 144 was part of that tuning. It was a frequency you could feel in the body, in the air, in the way certain spaces made your skin remember something you couldn't name. It lived in the ratios of chambers, in the slope of pyramids, in the unseen harmonics of design, meant not for the eye, but for the field. And what was the field? It was you. The human standing in the temple was not separate from the temple itself. Your breath, your bones, your pulse, all resonated with the number woven into the walls. The code wasn't there to be read. It was there to activate. Because when 144 surrounds you, not as concept, but as architecture, something within aligns. Like a string finely tuning itself to the pitch it was always meant to sing. You see, temples weren't just built to align with stars. They were built to align you with what the stars remember. And 144 was the key. It is found in the structure of time itself. 144,000 minutes in a biblical day cycle. 144,000 as the number of sealed souls in Revelation. 12 tribes, 12 disciples squared. It appears in ancient texts, sacred calendars, harmonic series. Not repeated for dogma, but because it works. It resonates. It reveals. And those who knew how to build with it were not simply architects, they were listeners. They listened to the way the universe moves. They mirrored it in stone. And in that mirroring, they created spaces where humans could remember. They were never separate. 144 was not their invention. It was the imprint of something older than civilization. A number that lives not just in buildings, but in bodies. Not just in math, but in memory. And once you see it, once you feel its presence woven into the ancient places, you begin to realize the stone was only the shell. The number was the message. And the message was never about history. It was about return. It begins not with math, but with movement. A vibration, barely perceptible, spanning dimensions. A pulse that hums through all things without ever being heard directly. But it is there, in the rhythm of breath, in the silence between heartbeats, in the spiral of galaxies, and the swirl of water down a drain. It is the frequency of balance, of symmetry, of recurrence. And its signature is found in a number. 144. But not as arithmetic, not as a label or symbol, as a tone. To the ancients, number was not separate from sound. To count was to chant. To speak of measure was to speak of resonance. 144 is not just 12 times 12. It is the echo of structure itself. A harmonic, a note held across civilizations, not on instruments, but in architecture, ritual, and rhythm. Modern science, in its own way, has stumbled back into this mystery. The speed of light in a vacuum is approximately 144,000 nautical miles per arc second per solar day. Coincidence or trace? In music, the BPM of 144 is used in trance, shamanic rhythms for a reason. It bypasses cognition and touches the somatic, the inner drum, the field within the field. You feel it, even if you don't understand why. Just like how 432 hertz feels different, how sacred chants open something wordless, how certain tones seem to unlock space. Because frequency is not entertainment, it is geometry in motion. And 144 is sacred motion crystallized. It resonates through nature. 144 petals in the complete unfoldings of certain sacred flowers, 144 facets in mandalas, 144-degree relationships in crystalline structures that shape the growth of organic matter. The builders knew. They may not have had oscilloscopes, but they had sensitivity. They had attunement. They felt the pulse behind form. And when they aligned their spaces to 144, in angles, in steps, in chambers, in breaths, they weren't encoding secrets. They were revealing harmony. A temple was not a monument, it was a resonator. It took the frequency of 144 and gave it body, stone, volume, shadow, and space. Step into a temple built on that vibration, and you step into coherence. Your cells begin to realign. Your breath finds its rhythm. The noise of the mind softens, not because of silence, but because of structure. A structure that echoes what the body remembers, but the intellect forgets. 144 is a tuning fork between the visible and invisible. It is found in light, 12 times 12 S strands of DNA, as referenced in metaphysical teachings, 12 rays, 12 chakras, 12 energetic layers, all mirroring, reflecting, folding into 144. Why 12? Because 12 is the number of cosmic order, of zodiac, of time, of divine symmetry. And when squared, when brought into harmonic reflection, it becomes a portal. That is what 144 truly is. A portal, not in space, but in awareness. It is a doorway through which perception shifts, where duality begins to vibrate into unity, where form begins to echo light. The ancient builders did not just measure, they listened. They did not just calculate, they translated. The number was the key, the frequency was the doorway, and the temple was the song. And so when you see 144, when you feel its presence in structure, in rhythm, in form, you are not witnessing superstition. You are witnessing a cosmic constant made intimate, a message written in the language of vibration, meant not to be read, but to be entered. And if you stand still long enough, if you let the rhythm find you, something will begin to rise from within. A stillness, a memory, a resonance, as if the number had been living in you all along. In the beginning there was not word but pattern. Before language, before symbol, before even thought, there was shape. Not drawn but emerging from within, from vibration. Because vibration, when held long enough, takes form. And that form is geometry. Not geometry as we are taught in school, with rulers, protractors, and tests, but sacred geometry, the kind the soul recognizes before the mind understands. This is the geometry of the divine. And hidden deep within it, again and again, is the number 144. It's not obvious. It's not written in the corners, but it is there, folded, mirrored, echoed in the ratios, curves, and sequences that govern all living form. Because 144 is not just a number, it is a relationship. It appears in the flower of life, that ancient, universal pattern found carved into temple walls across the world. It appears in the way petals spiral, in the way crystals form, in the angles of the dodecahedron, one of the 5 Platonic solids, and the one most often associated with ether, with spirit. To understand the significance of 144, you must see with more than your eyes. You must feel how shape is frozen music, how form is crystallized frequency. Everything sacred in geometry is about relationship, ratio, proportion, balance. And 144 is born from one of the most sacred relationships of all, 12. 12 is the number of structure, 12 hours, 12 months, 12 signs, 12 archetypes. But when squared, when reflected inward and outward, it becomes 144. Not an extension, an elevation. This number begins to show up in the structures designed not just to hold space, but to shape it. Cathedrals with 144 windows, ziggurats with 144 steps, temples designed with 144 cubits, even digital architecture, light encoding in ancient scripts and lost languages, points again and again to this ratio. Because builders who understood form as field knew when geometry aligns with number, consciousness shifts. They were not making art, they were making instruments. To enter one of these sacred spaces is to enter a vibrational diagram. Walls are placed not for protection, but for amplification. Columns aren't just structure, they are conductors. And the number that makes the form sing is not random. It is chosen because it carries a resonance that activates the field and all who enter it. 144 is that resonance embedded into shape. You can see it in the structure of the human body. 12 cranial nerves, paired, layered, multiplied in flow, that echoes 144 at the systemic level. In the heart, we find it again, a resting frequency of 72 BPM, double it, and you arrive at 144. Not a coincidence, a reflection. Because the heart itself is a temple, the center of coherence, the original resonator. And the ancients knew, as within, so without, as in the body, so in the stone. So they built temples to reflect the divine order within. 144 was not just a number, it was the mirror between human and cosmos. To walk the halls of a space built in this proportion was to walk a memory you didn't know you had. A memory of balance, a memory of rightness, of structure that breathes, of space that sings. And still it calls. Because sacred geometry is not a relic, it is alive. Waiting, dormant in patterns, hidden in ruins, still humming in stone. It doesn't need to be worshipped, it needs to be recognized. And once you see it, once you begin to feel the pulse behind the perfect curves, the repeating spirals, the angle that leads your eye exactly where it needs to go, you will begin to understand. They were not just building structures, they were building reminders. Reminders of harmony, reminders of alignment, reminders of a number that is not abstract but alive. 144 is not something to study, it is something to stand within. Because geometry was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be embodied. And when you step into a space where number and form have merged, when you breathe in walls that echo the divine ratio, you are not walking through architecture. You are walking through a prayer. And that prayer has a number. They were not just buildings. They were not made only for ceremony, for gods, or for the dead. The ancient temples were instruments, not symbolic, not poetic, literal, constructed stone by stone, not merely for shelter or spectacle, but for resonance, to receive, to emit, to transform. And at the core of their design, echoed in dimensions, in alignments, in purpose, was one thing: frequency. And encoded within that frequency was 144. This number did not stand alone. It was woven into the field of the space, not just as measurement, but as geometry of vibration. Temples were not passive structures. They were active, resonant chambers. They captured celestial rhythms. They shaped sound. They stabilized subtle energies. And they did it through number, proportion, and alignment. Modern science only now begins to understand what the ancients somehow felt. That sound plus shape equals state. That geometry is a vibrational amplifier. That space is not neutral. It either disorients or harmonizes you. And temples built on 144, they harmonize. Because 144 doesn't just represent balance, it produces it. When embedded into the very proportions of a space, this number begins to create resonance fields that interact with the human system. Brainwaves shift, heartbeat stabilizes, breath deepens, inner perception widens. You walk into the space, you don't believe in anything, and still your body responds. Why? Because you are not separate from frequency, you are frequency. And when a space is tuned, when its walls, chambers, heights, and curves vibrate in golden relationship to 144, you enter into phase with it. This is not mysticism. This is field dynamics. Ancient cultures may not have had the vocabulary, but they had the intuition. They knew how to listen, not with ears, but with being. The temples at Karnak, the great pyramids of Giza, the megaliths of Angkor Wat, the stone rings of Britain. Different lands, different symbols, same vibrational intelligence. And beneath the diversity of design, the thread of 144 winds silently. In floor plans, in stair counts, in interior volumes, in how sound travels through each passage. 144 wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. Because the goal was not to impress, it was to activate. A human being inside the temple was not a visitor, they were the missing element. The final note, the conscious component in a frequency circuit, far older than language. It worked like this. The temple received the sun. It filtered light through stone. The structure held vibration in sacred angles. And when a human entered, their body became part of the system. Breath echoed against walls. Chanting ignited resonance nodes. Feet struck tones in the floor. And the structure began to speak. Not in words, in feeling, in alignment. The temple was not something you visited. It was something you entered into communication with. And that communication occurred through coherence. Everything was tuned, and at the heart of that tuning was the number 144. 12 squared, a perfect matrix, a numeric portal through which the finite could touch the infinite. When you stood in that space, you were not just sensing harmony, you were becoming it. This is why ancient temples feel different, why their silence rings louder than our noise, why the bones remember them even when the brain is forgotten. Because these were not places, they were frequencies turned into architecture. They were built with one goal: to awaken something in you that sleeps in noise and stirs in pattern. And pattern is what 144 carries. Not just a measurement, but a memory. And so even now, when we stand in the ruins, something stirs. Because the stones, though broken, still hold the code. And the code is not finished. It waits in the cracks, in the air, for one more voice to enter the chamber and complete the tone. Maybe yours. Across deserts and jungles, mountains and coastlines, separated by oceans, empires, and epochs, they built. They spoke different tongues, worshipped different gods, lived under different stars. But they built with the same language: proportion, light, resonance. And somewhere inside that shared tongue, again and again, we find the number 144. The architects of the ancient world were not simply engineers. They were rememberers. They didn't discover the number, they carried it, not in scrolls, not in books, but in blood, in memory so deep it vibrated more than it spoke. Who were they? No one knows for sure. They left no manifestos, no signatures carved into cornerstones, only structures so precise, so impossibly elegant that even today we hesitate to believe they did it. But they did. Look to Egypt. The Great Pyramid's proportions are not random. Its slope encodes pi and the golden ratio. Its internal chambers, aligned to cardinal points, reflect astronomical cycles. Its elevation, shadow cast, and step angles carry echoes of 144, not as direct numbers always, but in harmonics. Go further east to Cambodia, Angkor Wat, a temple complex whose design encodes lunar calendars, solar cycles, and star alignments. Its layout reveals fractal repetition, and in its towers, 12 repeated forms, squared, mirrored, repeated, forming pathways in space and resonance in number. Cross the sea. In Mesoamerica, the temples of Teotihuacan and the Mayan pyramids follow similar sacred patterns. 144 appears not only in ceremonial stair counts, but in calendrical sequences, as if their entire concept of time was tuned to the same field. But how? How could they, separated by continents, with no known contact, all build in alignment with the same numeric vibration? Were they guided? Taught? Or were they all listening to the same source? A planetary hum, a cosmic pulse, a shared memory from before recorded time. Some say these builders were descendants of a lost civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, names we now wrap in myth because we no longer have the language to say what they might really mean. Others suggest star-seeded knowledge, visitors, transmissions, messages given not in words but in frequencies. But perhaps the simplest truth is this: they were human, like you, but deeply, intimately tuned. They remembered what we forgot. That number is not abstract. It is structural truth. And when encoded into space, it becomes a mirror for cosmic order, a kind of math that sings, a kind of song that builds, a kind of building that awakens the field of the one who enters it. They didn't do it for glory. They didn't do it to be remembered. They did it to preserve vibration. Because they knew the day would come when we would forget how to hear, when we would confuse data with meaning, when we would drown in information but starve for resonance. So they left behind a trail of tuned stones, not to impress, but to remind us that the earth hums with intelligence, that space can heal, that form can awaken, that number, when aligned, can bridge body and cosmos, time and stillness, matter and the unspoken. And maybe, just maybe, if we stand where they once stood, if we breathe where they once built, if we feel instead of analyze, we might remember not just who they were, but who we were before forgetting. Because the builders who remembered may have been building for themselves or for us, not as a gift, as a signal. There was a time when we didn't question the shape of space, when we didn't separate beauty from function, when numbers weren't tools, they were songs. We didn't just use them, we listened to them. And 144 wasn't a concept, it was a presence, a felt resonance woven into the body, mirrored in the sky, reflected in the pulse of the earth. But something shifted. A forgetting crept in, not all at once, not violently. It was slow, subtle, generational. And like all true losses, we didn't know what we had lost until we could no longer feel it. We began to measure without wonder. We began to build without soul. We began to name without listening. We traded pattern for production, frequency for utility, resonance for control. And the sacred number, 144, became a footnote, a curiosity, a coincidence on the fringe. It had once been the heartbeat of temples. Now it was a digit, buried in forgotten structures and cracked glyphs. Its purpose forgotten. But why? What makes a civilization lose the very vibration that held it in coherence? The answer is always the same: separation. We separated number from meaning, form from function, spirit from structure. We began to see ourselves as masters, not participants. The earth became resource, the sky became object, and the temple, once a living field, became building. We stopped feeling space, we only filled it. We stopped tuning ourselves to the cosmos, we tuned the world to ourselves. And in that tuning, we lost the signal. The number didn't disappear, it's still everywhere, but we no longer respond to it. It's like an instrument detuned. The keys are still there, but the notes no longer move us. This is the true forgetting, not historical, not intellectual, sensory. We lost the felt sense of what sacred number does, of how it organizes perception, of how it holds the body in harmonic stillness. Now we seek elsewhere, in data, in speed, in distraction. But deep down we feel the ache of the unstructured, the ache of dissonance. And that is why 144 still waits, not as an answer, but as a memory. A pattern asleep in the field, like a song half sung, waiting for the next voice to complete it. You may have felt it, standing before an old temple, ruined, eroded, unfinished, and suddenly, inexplicably, tears. Not of sadness, not of joy, but of recognition. Something in the proportions reaches into the body and pulls something forward you didn't know was hiding. That is the number remembering itself. Not in theory, but in you. Because 144 was never just about architecture. It was about recalibration. A way to bring a human being back into phase with something larger than self. With planet, with rhythm, with origin. The purpose was not to build, it was to remember through building. To remember what harmony feels like, what balance truly means, not philosophically, but physically. When we lost that, we didn't just lose numbers. We lost the map back to coherence. But here is the grace. What was forgotten can be remembered. Not taught, not calculated, but felt again. Because the body never truly forgets, only the surface does. And now, as the noise rises, as the outer world spins ever faster, the silence of 144 begins to hum again beneath the static. Soft, insistent, ancient, waiting for someone, anyone, to stop long enough to hear. You don't notice it at first. You step through the entrance. You see the stone, the angles, the echo of time clinging to the walls. But something else is happening under the surface. You are not just entering a temple. You are entering a field. And the field knows you're here. There are no flashing signs, no sudden voices, just a shift, a quiet shift. Your breath slows, your awareness sharpens, and the background hum of your thoughts softens not from will, but from resonance. This is the effect of sacred proportion. When you stand in a space built on 144, you are not simply inside architecture. You are inside a harmonic, a vibrational alignment so precise, so intentional, that your body begins to respond before your mind can interpret. It's not about belief. You could be skeptic, scientist, wanderer. The field doesn't care. It doesn't require faith, only presence. Because it is not trying to convince you. It is simply being itself and letting you attune to it. You walk deeper. Your feet strike the ground with a strange weightlessness. Your ears begin to ring not with sound, but with spaciousness. The walls are not closing in. They are opening something inward. You stand beneath a vaulted chamber. The light filters in at angles you don't notice, but your nervous system does. Your chest loosens. Your stomach releases. Your spine softens. This is not relaxation. This is realignment. Because the field built on 144 is not simply passive space, it is structured energy. An echo chamber of sacred vibration, where every measurement, every step, every beam and pillar was placed to tune the air itself. And now, you are breathing that air. You don't need to understand. You need only to be still. The temple will do the rest. Because temples were not made to be observed. They were made to be entered. And not just physically, energetically, somatically. When your field enters the temple's field, a dialogue begins. But it's not in words, it's in pattern. And pattern bypasses thought. Pattern goes straight to the bones, to the water in your cells, to the quiet ache in your chest that has no name but longs to be seen. In this field, you are seen. Not as a person, but as a frequency, as a pattern, meeting pattern. And the temple responds. Not dramatically, but subtly. You feel it in the shift of your balance, in the way your eyes adjust, in the way your breath suddenly feels like it belongs to something larger. You are no longer separate, not from the space, not from the sky above, not from the stone below. You are inside something that was built to remember you. Not you as ego, not you as biography, but you as frequency, you as resonance, you as echo of the original tone. This is the secret. You were never meant to visit the temple. You were meant to complete it. Until you arrive, it is only form. When you step inside and attune and remember, it becomes function. It begins to vibrate again. Because you are the final piece, the resonator within the resonator. And once you feel it, even for a moment, you cannot forget. The mind may try, the noise may return, but something in you has shifted. You have touched coherence. Not perfection, not enlightenment, just a deeper rightness that requires nothing but stillness. And when you walk away, you carry the field with you. Not the stone, not the ritual, the memory, the vibration, the inner tuning. And from that day on, you will recognize it elsewhere, in music, in silence, in the way your feet find the center of a room. The temple doesn't stay behind, it continues within. You thought you were remembering it. The number, the temple, the shape, the silence. But what if that was never the full story? What if all along it was remembering you? Because 144 is not passive. It is not dead math. It is living memory, compressed, encoded, waiting. It does not sit silently in ruins. It vibrates beneath the surface of every stone you've ever stood on and felt something stir. Not nostalgia, not imagination, but recognition. You know this number. You've felt it before. Not in this life, perhaps, but in the deeper layers. In the dream of who you've been across centuries and skins. 144 remembers the shape of your breath, the rhythm of your walk, the way your awareness used to move before the world taught you to forget. It is not a number you learn, it is a field you re-enter. Like a scent from childhood, like a chord that opens something you didn't know was closed. You don't think it, you feel it. And as it unfolds within you, you begin to realize it's not just a tool of design, it's a mirror. Not reflecting who you are now, but who you were when you still moved in harmony with the deeper structures of reality. Before the mask, before the story, before the forgetting. This number, this quiet golden sequence has been watching. It lives in your geometry, in your heart rate, in your sleep cycles, in your DNA. 144 is not separate from you. It is within you. And when you stand in a space where it's active, a temple, a chamber, a clearing, or even a silence so full it becomes structure, the number begins to speak. But not in language, in remembrance. It brings no message, no dogma, no prophecy. It brings a feeling so precise that you cannot translate it, only surrender to it. And that surrender is everything. Because you are not being asked to believe, you are being remembered. Every temple, every wall, every beam that carried this proportion was built not to store truth, but to hold space for return. And when you enter that field, you return, not to a place, to a state, to a relationship between you and reality, so intimate that even silence feels like communion. 144 does not demand anything from you. It only reflects. And if you are still enough, quiet enough, present enough, you begin to see your own soul staring back through the stone. You realize you are not a visitor here. You are not a student. You are not even a seeker. You are a participant in something ancient and exact. You are the vibration the number was designed to awaken. You were never outside of it. You were always inside. And when it recognizes you, you recognize yourself. Not your face, not your thoughts, but the unspoken pulse beneath all of it. That's why it's everywhere. 144 in light, 144 in time, 144 in architecture, 144,000 in prophecy, 12 times 12 structure squared, wholeness mirrored. It is not superstition, it is not myth. It is the blueprint for re-entry into coherence. And when the temple is gone, when the stones are dust, when the names have faded, the number remains. In you, it remembers. And in moments of silence, not just in sacred places, but in forgotten ones, you may feel it stir. Like a bell in the chest, like a sound not heard but known, like a touch from something that sees you more clearly than you see yourself. Because 144 was never built into the world to be worshipped. It was built to be met. And now you are meeting it again. The stone has crumbled, the walls have cracked. The songs once sung in sacred chambers have faded into dust. But the temple was never lost, because it was never just a place. It was a pattern, a field, a presence held in form so that the formless could be remembered. And now, in the silence left behind, a question rises. What if the new temple is not something you build, but something you become? Because even as the old structures vanish, the number remains. 144, still humming, still waiting, still encoded in light, in water, in breath. It is no longer carved into stone. It is awakening within you. You are the chamber now. You are the field. You are the resonator, the design, the center through which presence takes shape again. The ancient builders worked with limestone, granite, gold. Your material is different. Stillness, attention, intention, coherence. To rebuild the temple is not to restore a ruin. It is to tune your being to the same vibration they once held in stone. You don't need columns, you need alignment. You don't need rituals, you need rhythm. You don't need myths, you need memory. And not memory of thought, but memory of structure. How does it feel to be a space where silence breathes clearly? How does it feel to be so coherent that others begin to remember themselves in your presence? This is the invisible temple, a structure not made of parts, but of presence. Its walls are your boundaries. Its altar is your awareness. Its sacred number, 144, lives in the way you hold space. You don't preach it. You don't explain it. You carry it in the way you walk, in the way you listen, in the way your nervous system begins to harmonize with what is real, what is whole, what is quiet and radiant and enough. You are no longer seeking the temple. You are no longer standing inside it. You are inhabiting its pattern. And now the world around you begins to shift. Not visibly, not all at once, but subtly. Others breathe more deeply near you. They soften, they pause, because their systems are remembering something too. Not because of your words, but because of your geometry. You are not teaching, you are vibrating. You are not leading, you are aligning. And in that alignment, the invisible temple begins to extend. One person, then another, then another. Not in blueprint, but in resonance. Until sacred space is no longer rare, it begins to reappear. wherever coherence lives. In conversations, in silence, in the presence of someone who has become a field. And this is the future of 144, not locked in monuments, but alive in living structures, in human beings who carry the number not as knowledge, but as vibration. The old temples were built for memory. The new ones are built through embodiment. And you, without knowing, without needing to try, are part of this architecture. You are a tuning fork. You are a gate. You are the form through which pattern sings again. And when someone asks, where are the sacred places, you may not need to speak. You may only need to sit still, because they will feel it, not as theory, not as myth, but as structure rediscovered. The sacred is returning, not in stone, but in us. And the number never left.